start. And at that, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Bitcoin Bay community, for joining us today. We have an amazing panel of DeFi experts gathered here today to talk about this really big topic that's been causing a storm in the blockchain world. As you well know, DeFi stands for Decentralized Finance. Sometimes some people could call it the distributed finance too. It's essentially a movement that's been spurred on by the ETH Foundation, where the focus is to align capital and developer resources to bring innovation to an industry that needs it most, and that is financial services. And here to lead our discussion today is Scott Moore, co-founder and dev relations lead at Gitcoin. But before we begin, we have some community announcements to share to the crowd today. And I think it's Eric from Blockchain Center in Miami. So welcome, and yeah, we'd love to hear what you have to share.
Hello, Ed. Yeah, we are basically starting a weekly stream centered on developers for this specific type of development, and we are going really deep on really sensitive matters to really cut the where the fat is. Like, for instance, if we're talking about, I think we did last Wednesday, we're doing this way, part 2 of our Ren BTC or Ren VM series. So if we're talking about interoperability and going from like Bitcoin to Ethereum, for instance, we're doing an episode on it and then live coding it out.
Perfect. For those who are interested, find the link in our chat, and yeah, Eric, we'd be happy to share it around too.
That'd be great. Yeah, we're I know that developers in this type of environment are hard to come by, so really I think trying to be an advocate for developers in this space is important, and to put out content is important as well. For instance, if you're talking about Chainlink, actually I'm working with another developer named John on the verifiable random functions. If you're familiar, it's like one of their big things that's coming out of Chainlink right now.
Yeah, we're excited to get more developer mentorship here. There's a lot of
happening on Wednesdays at what time?
We usually start from 6 to 7 or 7 to 8, but we usually post like the week before what time it will be. I'm trying to make it more consistent, but I'm trying to think about what time is the best, because maybe during the day would be better, but right now it's 7 to 8.
Cool. So 7 to 8, and these are mostly live coding sessions, so that always works.
Yeah, it's always, we go over the topics beforehand, and then we try to go as deep as possible within time constraints.
Cool. Eric, thank you so much for that. So
yeah, no problem.
Looking forward to it. And so yeah, back to today's panel. For those who just arrived, Scott Moore, our moderator today, is co-founder and dev relations lead at Gitcoin. It is a company that connects talented developers to developer opportunities, and it does so in a decentralized way. They're actually participating in this year's San Francisco Blockchain Week, and they're actually holding a hackathon there. So at the very end, Scott, we'd love to see and have a link to that event. For those you should know, for those who are here, Scott has been a very long-time friend and colleague of mine, and a good friend of Bitcoin Base too. So we want to say a big thank you for him for moderating today. And now I'm going to leave the floor to you, Scott.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming by, I suppose virtually, given the circumstances. And yeah, I'm excited. We have a pretty good panel today around a lot of what I think is pretty relevant in the community. I won't, at some point we'll touch on some of the risks of DeFi. I won't dive into that immediately, but you can note some of what happened in the news today. But before we get into that, I wanted to introduce some of our panelists. And so maybe we'll start with Jesse and go from there. And Jesse, if you want to talk a bit about what you're doing at Futureswap first, and then we'll go to maybe Matt, and then to Keenan to kick things off. Just to start quickly on my end, as Edward mentioned, I do a lot of work with Gitcoin, not a coin still, very important note. And we tend to really try our best to grow developer communities both in Web 2 and Web 3. Ultimately, the goal there is that, if you look at, say, like Electric Capital's reports or even Consensus's reports, we've got somewhere between like maybe 10,000 monthly or like 200,000 monthly. It's a really wide range of active developers in the space. And ultimately, that's really small relative to the 50 million GitHub users that are out there. So just trying to figure out ways to grow that community and make things interesting to folks. And I think DeFi is a big part of that. So with that, Jesse, take it away.
Yeah. Right now at Futureswap, and kind of what we are like, a Uniswap liquidity pool kind of meets BitMEX futures trading. So allows people to trade perpetual futures, which is really kind of just leverage trading. I don't know why blockchain space calls things different things, but we do that. So we're perpetual futures using liquidity pools. We're just coming off of our alpha like two and a half months ago. And that went really well. We did like $17 million in trade volume in like 3 days. It was exhausting, but yeah, now we're just like heads down trying to see what areas can be improved on for a version 2 or second alpha or beta or whatever it's going to end up being called. So yeah.
Awesome. And Matt?
Thanks, Scott, and thanks Bitcoin Bay for having me and everyone for attending. I'm with Loopring, and Loopring is a ZK rollup protocol for scaling exchanges and payments. So historically, we've been just a DEX protocol. We've been around for about 3 years, and a year and a half ago, so that's a year and a half into our life, we started realizing we really have to scale this, or have the ability to scale throughput on our protocol, or this isn't going to be fun or useful for anybody. So we started diving deep into scalability solutions, so-called layer 2 solutions on top of the Ethereum layer 1. And we implemented the first ZK rollup on Ethereum about 6 months ago now. Hard to believe it's been that long, but it was December. And we have recently extended that ZK rollup to support payments, not just trading, which could be fast and cheap and not have like prohibitively high gas costs, but also payments, which could be, not stuck in a congested Ethereum environment. Importantly, without sacrificing any self-custodial security guarantees, because that's why we're all here, and that's what we find interesting in DeFi, is not sacrificing that. So that's what we're up to at Loopring.
Awesome. And Keenan?
Cool. Yeah. Thanks everyone for joining us this evening, and thanks other panelists in Bitcoin Bay for organizing. Really, really excited. So Chainlink is a decentralized Oracle network. So we provide oracles for different DeFi projects within the blockchain space. We also have VRF, which stands for Verifiable Random Function. So if you're building any sort of blockchain games, trying to go along NFT route, definitely reach out to us. Would love to work with you there as well.
Perfect. So I'm going to start really like high level, I think, and we can figure out threads that connect your projects from there. I think DeFi obviously as a theme is really broad, but is interesting on its own. But what do we mean when we say DeFi? Like what, from your perspective, does DeFi mean to you? So like Bitcoin obviously is like, even in itself, like quintessentially, like from the starting point, a financial application, right? It's a decentralized financial application. What does it mean? And feel free, like anyone, to jump in to you when you talk about DeFi.
Yeah, I can start off, I guess. So a lot of DeFi projects, I would say probably most DeFi projects, there's still like a lot of limitations in what you can do and what you can't do on Ethereum today. And a lot of them, and especially with just software in general, kind of have upgradable keys. So DeFi is less decentralized when, you know, somebody can run away with all the funds. Not getting like too high up on my high horse. We have those same issues too. And I would never be like so egotistical that I'm going to just write code once and it's just going to live forever and never need to be changed. So you always have that balance there. Like to me, DeFi is, okay, is this 5x more decentralized than your nearest centralized competitor? So if you're looking at us, it's like BitMEX, it's like, yeah, well, that's pretty obvious. You know, that's like a just easy thing to say. And if you're looking at like Compound or like Maker, what's your biggest competitor? I guess that would be like a bank. Are you 5x more decentralized? And the answer is pretty much across the board, yes. So to me, it's just as long as you can say, hey, I'm X amount better and we're striving to go in the direction to go more decentralized over time, then I think it's legitimate to call yourself decentralized finance.
I like that description from Jesse, looking at your closest competitor and seeing where you are relative to them. I've never thought of it that way, but for Loopring's case, it's been like sometimes to somebody who really doesn't know anything about DeFi or doesn't care too much, I'd say, you know, Loopring allows other people to build, or we also build on our own protocol, but anybody could build on it, to build a Coinbase Pro or a Binance or a Kraken, or for us Canadians or some of us Canadians here, a Quadriga that nothing bad could ever happen to, right? It is the can't be evil, you know, not just won't be evil, but you restrict the possible behaviors that a platform can take into just certain, you know, certain transparent user known kind of functions. So you cannot have, I mean, that's a fancy way of us saying the biggest component for us is non-custodial or self-custodial. DeFi has a lot of different things. Like, as Jesse said, some admin keys could still exist and you could update a contract, which people thought was one way, but then it's another way. And then, but yeah, the biggest thing for us and the promise we uphold always is 100% non-custodial security or self-custodial security. There's nothing Loopring can do or anyone else can do or a team member or even a state actor can do to separate a user from their assets that are on our platform. So the big one that we uphold is non-custodial. Then, as probably we'll discuss in this talk, there are instances where it's not perfectly decentralized, but I like Jesse's vision. You know, as long as you're going like a direction towards more decentralization, it's fair to say you're part of this movement. But I'd say custody is like table stakes for me. That's like the biggest, I like to think about it that way.
Awesome.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you both, Jesse and Matt. I mean, like if we kind of break down decentralized finance to like the words. So finance on its own is, you know, a big spectrum. And so I was like trying to explain this to my parents and family over the weekend. We had a big barbecue of like, okay, what is the point of decentralized finance? Like, why would anyone care? And it really comes down to what Matt's saying, you know, with this custodial aspect of things. And though it may seem trivial to us in maybe Canada, or I'm here in the United States in Colorado, but in many countries throughout the world, people don't have access to bank accounts. And, you know, it kind of blows our mind that that's the case. But being able to provide financial options and financial tools for people all around the globe and for us to be able to connect each other, I think is like one of the big keys of why we all want to build decentralized products, and kind of lean towards that non-custodial and really focus on the decentralized aspect of things, to provide access and to provide different tools for different people. But I think the non-custodial is really, you know, what Matt's saying is the important part about the decentralized finance and the why.
Yeah, I think that covers it really nicely. And like, I think the why is really important here. Like often I think people get into the ecosystem and they're not really super familiar with it. And they say, well, okay, I trust my bank. Why do I need to worry about having decentralized financial systems. And I think this is a really good sort of overview of just like, I think a starting point for people understanding that part of the process. And so with that, I kind of want to dive into some more details around like, so, you know, with DeFi, there's lots of different, I think, emerging, as Matt, you mentioned, like subfields, right? Like there's options, there's like debt instruments, there's equity instruments, there's exchanges and so forth. And then there's a lot of different categories of room for like improvement and growth on scaling. As Matt, I'm sure you'll have a lot to say on that. Actually, I may need to time cap you. And then on like, you know, other elements of, you know, risk in DeFi. And so I guess, you know, one problem that I do want to start with actually on that front is Keenan, you know, Chainlink really talks, I mean, of course, is really focused on the Oracle problem. And so for anyone who's not super familiar, I want maybe if you could describe that problem and also provide a bit more context on sort of Chainlink's approach to solving that in the context of DeFi as a starting point.
Yeah, so yeah, I think that that's a great question. And so for those that aren't aware, smart contracts, they really provide this base foundation for this non-custodial aspect of decentralization. Smart contracts are the backbone of being able to create this decentralized world and are very, very awesome tool that is just now becoming a forefront of creation. Contracts have kind of, they operate our life, everything from a phone to being able to, you know, pay for your apartment. Everything is broken down to a contract. And now we're able to start to automate those. Smart contracts themselves, they have a fundamental problem of not being able to get outside data onto these contracts. And so if you're creating maybe a contract for a peer-to-peer trading, you're going to want to know the value of what is being traded. So in the case of Chainlink, what we focus on at the moment is mainly around price feeds for different sort of decentralized financial products. So whether it be maybe a Loopring DEX or a Futureswap's platform, when you're moving large amounts of money, especially with something like Futureswap with, you know, 20x leverage, a few cents can mean millions of dollars for someone. And so you want to make sure that you have secure, reliable, and tamper-proof price feeds and secure, reliable, and tamper-proof data that's flowing into these contracts. And so that's what we focus on. We have a wide range of node operators that pull this data from all different areas, and then they're able to put it on chain for these different decentralized products.
Awesome. And so, you know, what do you think, just quickly, do you think the biggest challenges are right now with providing, like, obviously, like, I think we're getting better and better with how oracles work at the moment. We've certainly come a long way from like a couple of years back. What are the biggest challenges that you're facing, and how are those being addressed in the face of like some of the customers, which are like pretty big names that you're working with?
Yeah, so I think some of the biggest challenges or things that are of key importance to focus on is decentralizing data at the data level. So making sure that the Oracle providers are pulling data from many different high quality data sources. So from an Oracle standpoint, you want to make sure that the data that you're providing on chain is very high quality. If you're pulling data from maybe like a free API versus a paid API, you're not going to get the same sort of customer support and the same value that's going into these sorts of data. And so that's why it's foundational for us to always work with premium paid APIs for all of our data sources to make sure that that's the most important key. And I think that's what's missing within some other platforms, as well as making sure that it's decentralized and so that you're getting as many data sources as possible. Because if you're just pulling it from, you know, a single data source, it could be very manipulatable. You can go to, if it's just a single exchange, you'd be able to, you know, put in a big large buy order, a big sell order. You can manipulate that price. Now you can use these different tools that these guys are building to be able to go and, you know, cost someone a whole lot of money, which wasn't their idea when they were building these products, but you're able to kind of see what they call these money Legos and are these different platforms. And then you can manipulate one to create a non-zero outcome for someone else. And so I think that that's really some of the biggest keys of focus and something that we really, really work hard to try to solve.
So Jesse, Matt, not to put you on the spot, but like, do you think, like, how do you use oracles in your context? Like, it sounds, I mean, like, to me, it's one of the critical pillars, I think, of DeFi being successful in the long run. So like, in your context, how has that gone? Like, just implementing them in general, and then, you know, how have you found different solutions in the market working? And, you know, obviously Chainlink is the market leader, but like, what are some of the things you'd like to see in terms of solutions or additional features on oracles?
Yeah, do you want me to go first, Matt? Me?
Go ahead.
Okay, me. Yeah, no, definitely when it comes to like Oracle price ingestion, I would say Futureswap might have the biggest risk factor of like any DeFi product. And it's because we do like 20x leverage, which means that any problem that you would have for Compound or Maker or whatever of getting a price that's, let's say 1%, 0.5% difference, just times that by 20 for us. Because people can ratchet up 20%. And it's not only that too, it's the idea of price is kind of just like a moving target anyways. Price doesn't exist in like a real context. It's all about price discovery. So, I mean, what might be a good way to discover price for one product, like Compound or Maker, would be kind of pretty bad to discover it for something where you can, again, ratchet up 20% leverage. You know, when you kind of like think about that in the same models, if you're saying that, okay, this risk factor is okay for, I guess, Compound, Maker, I keep using those, maybe Loopring. Take that risk model you have and now times everything by 20, and that's the risk model you're gonna have to apply to something like what we're doing, which is kind of pretty insane. And then like on the actual investment side of the smart contract side, it was really good. In fact, Synthetics kind of was being hit by front running attacks. So they were doing a lot of research and work with Chainlink. And then we like saw what they were doing. We're like, great, we'll use their front running protections, which kind of was pretty awesome. I'm going into detail if you guys want, but it's pretty technical. So I don't know if it's the best forum. Yeah, so we like implemented that and it was fine, but we still kind of had like certain back running and front running. And from like an outside perspective, Oracle is like the absolute hardest part and the biggest issues. Things that I would like to see better would be like per block pricing, like blockchains that kind of just rely on Oracle itself. I think to me, that's like such low hanging fruit where, you know, you have all these layer 2 chains and all of them are going to say we're going to be the DeFi chain. To me, those DeFi primitives that, you know, DeFi developers need to build on that is, okay, how many updates can you get? How cheap can you get them? And like, how good can they be? Because to me, that's like the lowest hanging fruit that would make me as like a DeFi developer be like, ooh, this is a layer 2 I want to work on, or this is a layer 1 I want to migrate to. Is like, okay, how are you dealing with this Oracle thing?
Yeah, really good points. And maybe this is a perfect panel, and it was composed with real care because we're actually like on the opposite end of the spectrum from what Jesse said. If they're like the most sensitive to Oracle needs, Loopring kind of doesn't really, isn't sensitive to Oracle needs at all right now, although we do use a Chainlink for a certain thing, which I'll explain. But yeah, like we don't have these, we don't have leverage right now or these like complex instruments that depend on like a price known outside the system. Everything we do is kind of like very in our ZK rollup world. We will have leveraged instruments in like a V4 coming up, but that's not like what makes us unique, which is like our scaling technology right now. So we don't use it. It's like everybody uses, and rightfully so, Chainlink is awesome and has a great solution. Chainlink for these like price Oracle needs, right? They need to know if this condition, you know, it could trigger this liquidation or this and that, like Jesse's use case that he's mentioning. We just have basically like spot trading right now. So it is what it is. There's no Oracle info needing to get into the system. And there's no, and we do payments, which I don't think may ever need an Oracle for just simple use it. Just to show you a cool use case of where oracles could still be useful outside of like price contracts is, you said you're gonna have to time cap me. I'm not gonna get into the scaling spiel right here, but in a ZK rollup, there's kind of like a time where you're generating a cryptographic proof that will, in like a few minutes, give you that full Ethereum level finality, like that pure security once you submit like this validity proof. But in those like interim times, which is like a parallelizable process, you want to make sure the operator is going to generate this cryptographic proof. So they have something at stake in Loopring. They have LRC token at stake to make sure they're going to do their job properly. To be clear, they can never like steal funds or do anything malicious. That is Ethereum level security. But they could be like annoying and have like these bad service levels, right? By being slow. So we use Chainlink to say, hey, that LRC stake that a DEX operator must have on the line, so we could know that they will faithfully generate the next validity proof. That price, just to make it in like a human readable term, not like 5,000 LRC. What does that mean to all of you? You don't know, right? It's like $480 right now. We use just a Chainlink oracle to inform the system of, okay, LRC is worth 9 cents each, and this is what is at stake in like human readable terms, so so it's kind of like an edge little use case, but it's quite cool in the fact that it's unique. But you see how like getting info from an oracle is, could go beyond just like price and fancy derivatives and stuff like that. So yeah,
I know you don't want to necessarily go on for a long time, but actually that does segue well into like, I think we've covered like a lot of the key pieces of oracles. And I think, I'd actually really like questions from the audience on that front too. Like if you have questions about how to implement oracles or any particular ideas around like how to improve current oracles, I mean, that would be super helpful. But Matt, the thing I wanted to dive into now is kind of like the next pillar to me is like scaling. I think that like, to me, oracles are like the number one problem. I'm just ranking these in terms of like my own priorities. Like I just think these are like ones that I find personally really interesting. How do you view scaling in the context of DeFi though? Like, so obviously, we're not at the stage yet where I think we're seeing like institutional levels of volume. How do we get to the level where that's one, a possibility, and two, are there other barriers that you see in us getting to that point for institutions or for other larger quote unquote whales?
Right. Okay. So first of all, my ranking is different. Mine has scalability at the top, Oracle second.
It's a very biased, like it's just what came to my mind today, but
yeah.
Like they're all pretty important. I think we have to get like it's an and not or, I think, right?
Yeah, that's very true. But yeah, it's kind of interesting to think about like Loopring's history, and we weren't a scaling project until a year and a half ago, and then half a year ago we became kind of the leading and the only ZK rollup protocol, and now there's others joining us kind of almost on a monthly basis. But it goes to show you that people feel like scaling is a hot topic. Layer 2, scaling is much needed, and it's because if you believe that Ethereum, okay, DeFi, it lives on Ethereum for the most part. That's my bias or whatever. If Ethereum and DeFi is going to continue to be popular, which I think we all believe it will be, then the highway is going to get congested and it's not going to be fun, right? No, it's just not going to be fun or usable, except for whales that see a $25,000 arbitrage opportunity, so they don't mind paying $96 in gas to get it. So affordability is one thing. Like, so scalability means high throughput. So like a high transactions per second. And the flip side of that is a lower cost per transaction, since you have a higher throughput. So in Loopring's case, our scaling solution is what's called a ZK rollup. And a ZK rollup basically means, and I'll do like a really high level overview here, we take a bunch of transactions that would have been executed on chain and added to the traffic, but you put it on this like side fast lane, which has like this high-speed bullet train. So no one can take their cars and do like individual stuff. They'll have to board this high-speed train. And once everybody's on the high-speed train, let's call it 4,096 people to be exact, 4,096 transactions is our max capacity. destination at once. So we're not adding to the CO2 and the congestion. We do that, and maybe this is where my analogy falls apart, which I'm making up on the spot, but like you do it in such a way that the train must arrive at its destination. It cannot divert and bring you to the wrong place. Basically, like the execution of this computation is just as secure as if it happened on Ethereum layer 1 itself. And the reason is because you add this fancy cryptography layer to it, zero knowledge cryptography, which is, predates blockchain mania, right? Just like 1980s branch of cryptography, and much over my head. People call it moon math and alien math, and it's really awesome. But basically, we could execute a bunch of things off chain and say, take this little thumbprint that is kind of just a thumbprint of its veracity that this happened off chain, and we say this is now on Ethereum. Yep, you could check the states of the world on chain and off chain, and without an oracle in this case, there's no oracle needed because this validity proof is just submitted. Ethereum acts as a verification layer, so that's the technical solution, and you move it along like that. It's basically efficiency through aggregation. That's why this roll-up term is like rolling up a bunch of things and putting it on chain at once. So that's kind of the mechanic. Why is it so popular? Why is it so important? Is for this reason we see right now, right? Gas prices are 30x what they normally are. And let me tie it to you, Scott. I've been doing some Gitcoin grants, not necessarily like DeFi the way people think about it, but I'm contributing to people's grants and it's getting quadratically funded and it's awesome. And now I'm using your bulk checkout where I have 15 things, which is a great UX feature. And then I click confirm. And this is, no hate, this is all love here, but it's like, oh, you have a $6 gas bill. And I'm like, whoa, I'm trying to donate $20. Do I really want to pay $6? And that's why on Twitter these days, a lot of people are saying, hey, Gitcoin grants for round 7, maybe have a layer 2, look at Loopring, and we're eager to get into that conversation with you. But it would be awesome if at checkout, I could click submit and it could literally be free. It's so cheap. This aggregation, this high-speed train next to the highway is so cheap that it's literally okay for Loopring to subsidize it, maybe for 100 years. Don't take my word on that. Maybe one day we will institute a small fee, but right now we could settle 1 million transfers for $60 or 0.00006 of a dollar per transfer. So that is just a UX improvement, right? A lot of this just comes down to usability. I want to be able to transfer my money to these Gitcoin grant deserving projects, but I literally might be boxed out by the cost. So Loopring allows you to do this in such a way where you don't sacrifice the self-custodial guarantee. I don't need to give my money to Gitcoin first and then they distribute it. No, right? That's Gitcoin wouldn't even want to do that, right? They want to know it's in your own wallet. That's what we allow. So just I'll leave it there. But Gitcoin grants round 7. We'll see if it has layer 2 involved.
I'm very interested in that idea. The only challenge is just like product roadmap. If you submit a PR, Kevin will review it. But that is the challenge. Is that the Loopring team would have to submit a PR. It is on our roadmap though. It's something we've talked a lot about, and it's something that we really do want to make a part of. Maybe not round 7, but round 8. The next thing is just a plane overhead, which I guess people are still flying during a pandemic, which is an interesting note. But the thing I wanted to dive into, I think, so actually, Jesse, first, do you have any comments on scalability before I dive into the next topic? Just to give
Oh my God, yeah. Where do I even begin? I have so many comments on scalability. And by the way, you guys think Ethereum is going to be unusable? I mean, have you checked ETH gas station lately? It's 50 ways low safe or some ridiculous number like that. Plus, state float and all that other stuff. I think that you kind of get into this really awesome, but really. So the question was what scalability do you need to actually take a bite out of centralized exchanges? And I think you'll start to really see, and the awesome thing is that once you start to actually have scalability that can reach that transaction per second, and then you have people using it. By the way, using it is going to be one of the biggest issues for this too. You can build a 100,000 second TPS chain. You're going to have issues with storing that data on a bunch of different nodes. I don't know if Loopring suffers from that state float issue, but when you start to get people using it, then like the whole Chainlink model of going off chain to get prices on chain might not be as valid then, and they would move to a different model where you actually go on chain to get data on chain, which would be crazy because once you start to have that much liquidity and that much people using it and the ability to use it, then your price discovery is actually on chain. And that's kind of when you start to see maybe decentralized like exchanges really take a bite on decentralized exchanges. I have no idea what the liquidity numbers are like now, but I would be very shocked if like all DEXs combined compare like 1% to like centralized exchanges. But once you start to see like that model moving to the other side of things like that. One thing that this is an issue though is you have a million different things competing. Now you're gonna start to break composability between like decentralized projects. Like for everything that we did with DAI, we put our stuff in the DAI savings rate, which was whatever you have plus 8% on DSR, which is a huge like boost for like, you know, having different platforms interoperate. So I put my money into Compound and I also make money on Maker and I also make money on Futureswap. The second you start to move off chain stuff, that kind of breaks a little bit. As long as maybe you can abstract things away with tokens, but as more abstractions you get, the more dangerous that gets. So yeah, scalability, good. And I think when you start to see like Chainlink's model move from some sort of off-chain price discovery to like on-chain price discovery, and that's considered safe because you have the liquidity, is when you really start to see DEXs like overtake centralized exchanges.
Really good
Awesome.
point. Just to add something there, you're right on, Jesse. Like we could do 2,100 transactions per second. Right now we're doing 0.1, right?
Yeah.
Like that's so. And to be clear, 2,100 is already overkill. Like centralized exchanges don't do 2,100. They do that maybe in like the peak, you know, Black Thursday type situation. Like 10 is what they're doing normally, you know, even the big ones. So we have the capability. We have to lure the centralized exchange users over if they do value speed. But you're right. You're right. You can build it. Doesn't mean they necessarily will come. But yeah.
Well, so that's a really good segue, which Matt, you sort of like foreshadowed, like the idea of, okay, so we have, you know, the ability, we have the tools, I think. How do we get more users actually on these platforms? Like, this is not just actually, in fact, DeFi is doing the best of anyone in the like entire blockchain ecosystem at like getting users. I think that like probably at least 80% of transaction volume, maybe 70 to 80% is probably like DeFi at this point on Ethereum, which is just like wild. How do you think about that process of like getting additional adoption? Obviously, usability is like a big part of that, but like leaving it a bit more open-ended, like usability is part of that. What do you see as the biggest challenges there in terms of getting people, you know, interested in this, switching over from a more centralized solution? Like, how do we get people on Coinbase to fundamentally move their assets to a DeFi solution? And I'll let anyone take that.
Yeah, okay. I think one of the things that's been going around, and by the way, memes is the hands down best way to do this. But like the newest trend and meme is kind of the yield farming one. So when people can see that there are incentives that are lined, right now, I'm not sure that there are any DeFi platforms that actually make money for the company themselves. They're all like on VC funding, and all that VC funding kind of goes towards you know, different people in the actual ecosystem. So you kind of have the Compound token going from $18 to $500, and this whole idea of like yield farming, and also on Balancer too. Probably shouldn't talk about that right now though, with the recent troubles. But the idea that you can be incentivized to use a platform, incentivized to provide liquidity to make money, incentivized to just use it and get tokens back itself, and kind of have that built into the system, is probably a good way to bootstrap. Although I would be kind of a little bit concerned if the reason why a lot of people use these platforms are to earn tokens that are just kind of given out. It doesn't seem like a really healthy behavior, but to bootstrap liquidity and bootstrap usage in the early stages, yeah, it probably makes a lot of sense.
That's a great one. That's a bit incentives, right? How will people come? Pay them to come. And if you're not, you know, not in a in a direct manner maybe, but for their liquidity, for whatever you're trying to incentivize, give them something for that behavior. You know, how do we get people to come from Coinbase to like a Loopring based exchange where they can never lose their money? The answer is not to like, you know, yell in their face, be like, not your keys, not your, you know, not your keys, not your funds, and be like, you should care about security. Nobody cares about security. Nobody. Probably half of us on this call don't care about it. And no one's going to pay for security or go out of their way for security. It's like, if it's easier than the default, then yeah, maybe it's a 50-50, they'll do it. But otherwise, they're like, right, our society functions on trust, and Coinbase probably is fine to earn many people's trust. It's better than keeping your own custody, like not for everybody, but you know, so my philosophical answer is like choice. People like choice should entice people, but at the end of the day, all of this comes down to, and I'm really learning this lesson with Loopring right now. How do we get people to come there? Simply, it's a better UX. It's like a better experience than the incumbent legacy systems, right? Like recently when we launched Loopring Pay, like the ability to do these transfers, not just trades, that actually blew up more popular than anything we've ever done in the exchange world. We're like, oh, who knew people love payments so much? And that's become a huge talking point. And then people start saying, hey, you're kind of like Venmo on Ethereum or PayPal on Ethereum. Like, oh, that's pretty cool. And you know, I'm Canadian. I cannot send Keenan probably has Venmo. I cannot send him $5 after this because I enjoyed his talk. Or, you know, like how stupid is that? Like I could interact e-transfer you, Jesse, but I can't send something to Keenan. Imagine everything that Ethereum gives you, borderless, permissionless, maybe even a non-dollar denominated unit of account, right? Maybe if Keenan didn't want dollars, I could give him in the value in ETH, but like just simple UX improvements, right? So a global Venmo with instant thing and lower fees and all these UX things, like, right? People say, oh, Dex is like our bad UX. Those people aren't really paying attention in my opinion. Like, have you tried setting up a new account on custodial exchange and doing it? Or have you just tried like plugging in your MetaMask and going and running? And that, like, it all comes down to UX. And the final thing I'll say on this, I don't want to be too long-winded, Loopring has realized this recently, and all our like cutting edge scalability research is really getting distilled into our forthcoming product, which is the Loopring wallet, which we just want to compete with fintech applications. We don't even think about this as like a crypto thing. It's going to be a crypto wallet that a normal person could have in their pocket, right, on their phone, for the reasons I just mentioned, because it's a de facto global Venmo, instantly and cheap, and you could also never lose your money, right? But it's very hard to go to the masses and be like, hey, use this because you'll never have your assets seized. How many people have had their assets seized, right? Like, certainly it's a huge problem in many countries, and I'm not making light of it, but the people that just like blindly say bank the unbanked and stuff like that, if they're really focusing on that consumer, sure, that's great. That's the highest ideal, but there's so much more to just UX improvements before that.
Yeah, I just want to add to both of those. I think that's like exactly it. Like what comes down to like the why and the usability. And going off of like what Jesse was saying with like the memes, like there's a meme with like the Facebook movie, you know, and it's like, we got decentralized finance, like drop the D, it's cooler. And like soon as we start like, you know, really thinking and have that usability and the UX for DeFi products, and they're just as easy as, you know, using Venmo or using any sort of other financial application, and you're competing with those, I think that we'll see a lot more people going to want to be using those. Other things that I think that go into the why, and I kind of missed out on the beginning with like oracles and what you can do with the power of Chainlink, is being able to provide off-chain assets and take these on-chain. You're seeing this with like a few different products, but now you can start to make these guarantees by pulling in stuff from the real normal financial world, whether it be mortgages, car loans, different things, and be able to, you know, tell someone that they can get X amount percentage back guaranteed if they hold a certain asset on a platform. And these are all possible with oracles and being able to take off-chain assets, which, you know, comprise all of the financial world that we live in right now, and be able to make those onto, you know, this decentralized world that creates borderless and trustless applications for each of us to be able to use. But yeah, I think Matthew and Jesse hit it right on the head.
Oh, that's really cool, by the way. I didn't know that the idea was to take anything outside world on like cars and stuff. Because once you can tokenize that, they can hook into pretty much any DeFi product. So that's like really cool.
That's awesome. There's a few questions in the chat. We'll get to a lot of them at the end. But I do want to ask, just because it came up a couple times in this conversation specifically, like what particular pieces of UX do you think are like most needed right now? Like Matt, what are the like, you know, in the user testing you've done, what have been the biggest changes where people have just said like, wow, like this is like a huge improvement over what I was using before? And same question really, like, Keenan, what you talked about there was really cool as well. And then Jesse, just very quickly, maybe thoughts on particular features or changes.
Yeah, so it's kind of the most important question, and recently it's what scalability answers in our case, or in any case, right? Like you hear people griping every day about the inability to send a transaction. Gas fees are too damn high, right? Like that's the biggest thing in UX. Forget UX. Let's talk about like literally just usability, where it's we don't want to make this just for rich people in terms of what's worth it to even do a transaction. That would be really sad if that's how it ends up. Scalability is not just like a cool buzzword like, hey, we want to go fast. It's like, no, we want to make all types of economic transactions economically viable, and not you know, box out somebody that's remitting a payment of 2 DAI to their mother in you know, in Guatemala or something, and say, oh, I can't do it because gas fees are too high today. That's brutal, right? So that's the biggest UX thing. And I'm really happy. You know, a lot of us, we deal in the world of speculation, right? Not to say that's a bad thing. Speculation kind of paves the path and pays the bills. You could go 20x on Jesse's platform. You know, here we've been exchange builders our whole lives, but now it's really cool to actually have conversations where there is that meaningful bit that I alluded to before, where someone, you know, we're speaking to a wallet that wants to implement Loopring Pay and say, hey, you know, I'm very large in Latin America where people use DAI to live because they don't trust the Argentinian peso. And now they're just really having trouble because of gas prices. Hey, could you help us? Like that was the best feeling, honestly, of the past 3 years for me, was thinking that we could impact like their 50,000 users' lives. So that's awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, by the way, like if you kind of like look at the numbers now for all like this cool like yield farming stuff that everyone's talking about, or maybe that's just my inner like shouting circle that I'm hearing. All I hear about is yield farming nowadays, but you can't really do that under $10,000. So you're like pricing out everybody on like the lower tier, because you put through like a $10 trade, 8 of those are going towards gas or whatever. And not just, by the way, that one trade, approve, send, you know, collect your funds. I don't know. Sometimes on these platforms, you can get up to having to do like 5-ish transactions. Actually, that'd be really cool. Batch transactions on Ethereum. That sounds like a really awesome thing. So you can just kind of like roll these all up into one. There are like teams that are like Argent, which is really cool one-click DeFi stuff, which they're subsidizing gas, but not and you know, this is stuff that PayPal did in the early days. So it's not like you don't see this in regular Web 2.0 world. It's just not a real sustainable model. Like saying like, hey, as long as we have the money, we'll pay for your gas, but that's going to run out eventually one day. Works for the beginning, it's a Band-Aid, full Band-Aid. So yeah, any way to like make the barriers of like first entry like easier for UX, and then any like, as a platform itself, I would say like worry on making your platform the best as possible and leave those UX tools to integrate with it, to think teams like Argent and teams who focus on this, like Ethereum, like focus on this like 100%, and just make sure to like go and integrate with those people. But again, still you're pricing out a lot of people at the bottom, which kind of just a bummer. So they can get flash loans and they can do fun whale stuff, but that's only for like a second in time. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true, and kind of like what Edward's saying here, like the jargon, like as important as like ZK rollups are. Like, it's interesting. We did a meetup with one of the directors of EY blockchain last week, and he spends his day talking with executive C-suite level people and everyone in the Fortune 500, trying to get them, talk to them about blockchain, decentralized finance, and the ZK rollups, it's already over their head, and so like trying to break down these terms. I think we're seeing a lot of this with really cool new apps like Argent, being able to bring these DeFi products to an everyday person. But if that's how a C-suite person is, then my brother or whoever that isn't a part of this industry, and they're just working and doing their thing, like they're not going to have that same, they don't care how it works, they just want it to work. And so that's why like building these things that Loopring is doing and that Matt works on every day and Jesse works on it is so vital and important, because as soon as these gas pipes get in place to be able to make this whole industry run, then no one is going to know how it works, but they're just going to be using it every single day. And I think that's why like we're at the forefront, and it's very, very close, and every single day it's getting closer and closer. And I mean, just from when I first got in like 2015 compared to like where it was today from then, it is light years ahead. So we're definitely on the right path, and building these things that will make gas a lot cheaper, so no one will even have to even worry about it, is going to be able to make the next blockchain developer be able to create that application that could have millions if not billions of people using it.
Awesome. So what's interesting, like those are all really good like points, I think, on usability. What's interesting is like, and maybe it's just the framing of the question, but and it wasn't necessarily something I expected to come up, but I've noticed that like we haven't really touched on governance of DeFi platforms. And so like it's interesting because like a lot of obviously, well, I guess I'll name names like Compound, for example, right, has put up governance as a really big piece of their strategy. What do you all think about the idea of introducing governance to these kinds of platforms? Obviously, Maker is being like a really long-standing case of this, and I think has done a relatively good job of growing in general as like a test case of what it means to go from like centralized to decentralized governance. But what do you see in general in that space? And I guess, what are your thoughts on the future of governance in DeFi?
I built the governance system for Futureswap, and one of the things that like was the biggest issue for me, well, one is a lot of the platform, the question is, are they on-chain or off-chain governments? Like, are your tokens meant for signaling, or do they actually forward like data and code that can automatically get executed? Ours is the latter, except we can, with our admin keys, obviously veto and do all of those voting things ourselves without having to wait, which is again one of those things that I talked about before is, in a new piece of software, you need to change things fast, and we're not going to say we're perfect developers and we're going to have perfect code. It's how much control those admin keys have. But one like issue that I knew that I was thinking of that was like really difficult to answer was the usability of the DAO or the governance, and the versus the security, I guess would be the right word in this regard. And specifically, one person who I like listen to heavily on this is Gavin Wood, who talks about there needs to be a lockup period for your tokens if you're going to make a change. That way, you kind of like, somebody says, I want to make this change, but if that change is going to be detrimental to the system, then it's like, okay, well, your tokens and your stake that you're putting in is going to feel the effects of that. That being said, having to lock up your tokens for any period of time and then unlock them after is not good UX. And it will definitely decrease your voter turnout. So like the question was, do you have to require people to lock up their tokens, or do you not have to require people to lock up their tokens? Kind of one of those trade-offs between maybe a more secure system versus a more usable system. And then if it's not usable, it's not secure anyways, because nobody's going to be voting. What was the point of even having it, right? And even with these scalability issues, having to pay $10 to make a vote is definitely going to decrease your voter turnout. So, those were the definitely difficult questions, and that I think every DAO/governance system in each DeFi product is going to have to like be worried about.
Yeah, well said. That's like a nice granular consideration. I'm not sure if Scott, you meant like relating specifically to UX, but I guess I don't. I'm not sure if I believe this strongly, but I don't think governance has like anything to do with UX. It's the same thing as before. It's like, hey, use this instead of Coinbase because no one could ever seize your money. That's like a very weak argument to a lot of people. Hey, use this because you could vote to upgrade the next upgrade of the protocol. It's like, get out of here. Like, I actually view that as a negative, right? Don't bother me. I just want to use it. Don't like send me an email asking for a vote or like, whatever the equivalent is. Like, that nobody actually cares. Governance is a thing to it's a component of the security and decentralization aspect, right? If something is decentralized but could be changed to being less decentralized tomorrow, then it's not decentralized. If governance is in that mix to give more people a vote and have these lock periods and delays before things are forwarded, then it's like a security thing. So it's like literally a security thing. And then also like a sustainability thing to the extent that like, will users or builders, depending what type of platform you are, want to build on you if they think that you could pull the rug from underneath them one day, right? Like if 100 dexes and payment apps started building on Loopring, and then they realize like one day they're like, what if Loopring wants to change something? Then they don't like that. They would like to have a say in it. So it's a sustainability thing. Like, yeah, I don't know if it's UX. It might be contra UX for the layman, but actually UX is part of everything because then you have like delegation in governance, right? I delegate my vote to like an expert in like some type of technocracy, So yeah, but I don't think I don't think governance is a selling point at all. It's become a cool way as a token model recently, and it's important. Governance is needed, but yeah, and Loopring has to start looking at that now that actually people care about us and people build on us and use our products. We have to start thinking about governance. But for the past 3 years, we could have said, hey, now you control Loopring, and it'd be like crickets, like first get the users and the cool stuff and then govern to make sure it's longevity, I guess.
Could I interject for a second? Just on a point I definitely disagree on. Most of that I agree on. But one point I do disagree on is that every decentralized system, for the most part, unless I'm missing one, can be changed with a type of governance, even Ethereum, the core code. It's just how hard it is to do that is like the question. Like if you can get every Ethereum node person together and be like, all right, now start running this code instead, they're gonna run that, which happens all the time with forks, right? It's just significantly harder to do by X amount, right? Then with like, these protocols, it's like, okay, how hard is it to change? Does it require a vote of X amount of token holders, or does it require like amendment keys from these people? Like M&M. So even Bitcoin, by the way,
for sure,
core code.
Right, but I don't mean to say things can't be changed. I really believe everything we're talking about is like a social. It's like the cool thing about all this is social stuff. So everything is just a social contract. I know everything could be changed. You could take Bitcoin and take the UTXO set and go somewhere else, and everything could be changed for sure. But yeah, it's a social construction. I agree with that.
Just how hard, I guess.
Yeah. So just in the interest of time, there's a bunch of things to cover around risks and security, which we probably won't get to. It's a shame. I'm sure everyone really wanted to dive into the potential risks of what's going on. But yeah, actually, let's maybe jump into some Q&A from the audience, and we can take some of those pieces offline. Jesse, as the known balancer hacker, obviously, you'll have a lot of. No, I'm just kidding.
I didn't know. No, I've been busy.
No, I'm just kidding. But Jesse, I have no context on that. Do not put this on record for any whatsoever. But yeah, so I know we have, I think, somewhere where we're aggregating the Q&A chat, like the chat questions. But let me just go back up because I can't find that, and we'll start with maybe this one from Chris from Shift, which is just like, what and this is to everyone, what does everyone think of the sort of like introduction of compliance tools into the field of crypto in general? And so in DeFi, you know, how does that interact with what you're trying to do, and how does that interact with like bringing in institutional players to the space? You know, compliance tools being rules around like the FATF travel rule, like sanctions, money laundering risks. Obviously, those are all like, I guess we're getting to risks after all, but like those are all obviously big pieces. What are your thoughts on those from a decentralized perspective?
I kind of like zone out when we start to talk about that in the company, and I'm like, do I need to integrate anything? Nah. Cool. All right, pass. If the DEXs get as big as central exchanges, you're probably going to have to see a lot more things around that. I know Consensus has a product. I know the Maker's gone in the KYC route, but honestly, I'm not an expert there, and I probably shouldn't be talking about it. Like probably Nelia or Chris is way better like than me to talk about this. So.
I like to tune out, but I'm not a developer, so I can't just tune out to that to the extent Jesse can. But yeah, so first of all, I'll start by like the good news, or this one side, that a lot of this stuff, like the non-custodial stuff, is so regulator friendly. People think that everything like DeFi and Ethereum, it's like, and crypto is like contra regulator. Some of it is literally the best friend a regulator could have, right? And I actually wrote like a really long, boring article on this, like a 20-minute, that goes over the CSA's guidance, like the Canadian Securities Administrators guidance that came out in January, and says, hey, centralized exchanges, you're gonna have to up-regulate or like register as securities businesses, even if you're just dealing with like Bitcoin and Ethereum, which let's say are not securities, are recognized as digital commodities, you're still gonna have to be a securities exchange. So you have like a greater burden of compliance and regulation. Or if you don't want to go that way, and it might cost you millions of dollars in legal fees and all these processes, then just give your users, and I was so impressed reading this, they're basically describing non-custodial exchange technology, saying don't be reliant, don't be like, if the exchange extricates themselves and users could get their money no matter what, then that's good. You don't need to be a securities business. So I wrote this whole thing saying, that's great. I'm for that guidance. People, this technology exists. You could give your users non-custodial guarantees that they don't have to rely on you for their assets, and you don't need to become a securities business. And the conclusion there is non-custodial tech is a huge boon for regulators in this, because I don't want to bring up their name again, but then a quadriga cannot happen, simply cannot happen. Not that there's an insurance pool that pays out the people, no like these Band-Aid solutions, but literally technologically cannot happen. So those are regulator friendly. But the other side, which is like maybe the preponderance of evidence or importance, is a lot of this is simply regulatory arbitrage for a lot of people. Like that may be an unpopular opinion or not, but DEXs and things that don't enforce KYC at the front, it's a big thing because it gives people freedom and the ability to do things that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to do. And that, you know, to a certain extent, Ethereum is creating a parallel financial system, not a complementary one that needs to hook in and follow the old rules. This is a parallel system, and in some cases it's anti everything else, and this is the system. And then that's a good thing. That's a bad thing for institutions that may not be able to make, but there's also a solution that could make it friendly and port over to the legacy system. You know, there's just so, won't get into the details here, but you could play nicely or you could not play nicely. It's up to the product or the platform. And those two things will always exist, in my opinion. Institutions will be able to find ways to use Ethereum nicely and without anti-money laundering, and kind of create their own silos on Ethereum where like there's whitelisted actors, and there will also always be this permissionless, unkillable thing. And for better or worse, I think for better. Yeah, that's my opinion.
Awesome. Any other thoughts on that before we jump to the next segment? Jesse, I know you love compliance. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, let me talk 30 more minutes on it. Sure, why not? I can
All
say
it, like low-key, actually compliance expert. I think so. There aren't any more questions in like the chat, but I'd be curious to get like, so if anyone has like, maybe we'll do like a raising of hands. Like if someone has a question, just raise your hand and we'll call out and make sure that gets answered. If you're not sure, there's like a reactions thing at the bottom of Zoom, which is like not super, it's kind of like hidden. So I don't know, but like, click that. Yeah, there we go. Joseph, you have a question.
Hey, I have a question. So, hi guys, thanks for presenting, and I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed this panel. One thing I really want to kind of touch upon is like I want to kind of direct it to everyone, but you know, I really what Matthew said resonated with me was, you know, helping those people who are really in need of those kind of like two guys to send remittances back and all that. So, you know, my question would be like, you know, what do you guys think about how DeFi can help, you know, developing countries and people who are actually, you know, can actually really benefit from DeFi the most? You know, like we can get like a couple of dollars here and there, that's great, but you know, for those developing countries and the people there, those $1 and $2 make a huge difference, right? So, you know, I want to kind of hear like what you guys kind of think of it, and like, you know, what do you think and how will DeFi kind of approach those kind of spheres and those audiences? Thanks.
I mean, for me, I guess I can start. For short term, like nothing. Like you don't expect somebody to be able to start trading on these platforms with like no money and no knowledge, and especially trying to like fight these gas prices. That's crazy. And then also don't give me this, I don't know who would make an argument that, oh, but you can do a flash loan and then these people can have large access of capital for like, you know, a second per transaction. And I mean, sure, maybe in the future that's a thing, but still the level of technical complexity around that is crazy, and I wouldn't make that argument. However, in the long run, maybe with Chainlink getting assets on chain and all that different type of stuff, and when we start to see DEXs take over centralized exchanges and stuff, you know, people always using the term bank the unbanked, but banks don't just provide money and remittances, banks provide financial tools. So if you can have financial tools that allow you to get loans, to start a business, put up actual real world collateral, doing all those things, yeah, there's definitely a road to being able to like service people that are definitely marginalized right now. That being said, like I would not for a second think that we're currently on that path within a short period of time at all. Like I think it would be delusional to think that. But one day maybe. Sorry, I'm still an optimist.
Let's end on that note. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, click.
That's the quote. That's the quote for like the like clip, the YouTube clip. Delusional to think that.
Oops, I probably shouldn't have been so.
No, it's good. I think it's good, honestly, to have like a level of like, you got to be like, I think, realistic about where we are now versus where we're going. Like I think often on these kinds of panels, we're like really hyper optimistic about like we're gonna do everything, and it's good to have some level setting. Matt, Keenan, did you want to jump in at all on that?
I want to jump in just to go against Jesse, even if I may somewhat agree with him, but I'll just have a counterpoint, which I actually believe in, but there's holes in it. But I'd say that the biggest things that could be done to help these people have already been built. And the first one is as a monetary technology versus like a technology platform and all these fancy things we're talking about. Forget ZK rollups and futures. What about just having an asset that people could opt into, as long as they have, right, an asset that they could store their wealth in. And, you know, I'm not necessarily making the case for Bitcoin or Ether, but those are the two, you know, store of value assets that have some, you know, some oomph behind them. But that's the biggest thing we could do. There's a lot of people that don't have a vessel to store their assets in, and they're in very precarious positions. And that ability has existed for 11 years now with Bitcoin and 5 years plus with Ether. So that's the biggest thing. So it's that. And then some people say, okay, it's not a great store of value. And yeah, you're right. To them, they actually prefer the US dollar. And that also exists on these platforms now. Fashions or trusted fashions, whatever, along that spectrum. So that's the thing. And the other thing is just to store, so to expose themselves to that asset and opt out of their kleptocratic regime wherever they live, and then store it themselves, right? Forget transferring at 2100 TPS and 20 times leverage. What about just the ability to store it in your brain wallet or your hardware wallet that you buried 20 feet underground? And you know, like, so the seizure resistance there too. So like, those are the real building blocks. Those have existed for a decade in some cases. Everything else we're doing is gravy to some extent. Like, yeah, we want to be able to do payments, and on Bitcoin, that's too expensive. And on Ethereum, it's now also too expensive. So Loopring is existing to allow you to do that, but you know, that's gravy. The big stuff is already built. I don't know how that stands up as a counter argument, but.
Awesome. I'll pass it to Edward if there's no further comments on that. Although there is the compound and maker debate to go into potentially, which just came up in chat. But Edward, maybe if you want to take it from here.
Sure. But before I go, does Keenan want to share any thoughts on the last question, or?
No, I think they covered it really well. You know, I mean, like, there's both sides of the argument, and yeah, I think that they covered it pretty well.
Okay.
It bums me out that I took a pessimistic route. I'm usually such an optimist.
No, it's good to have these different points of view. The counterbalance is what we need. So, guys, just a heads up. Like, we are close to 7:30, so we'd love to have you guys interact more with our panelists here. We've set the mute options to unmute all, so that you can ask questions directly by voice to the panelists here. And so, like, before you like formulate your questions, or while you formulate your questions and build up the topics that you want to bring out, I just want to ask the panelists, like, you had some really great conversations here. And like, you spurred a lot of insights and deep thinking here. If people want to catch up with you or contact you, is there any way that they could? And what's the recommended way to reach you?
Yeah, for me, Twitter. DMs are open. I will post that in the chat. I'm going to self-plug my Twitter. I sometimes tweet fun things. Sometimes.
Yeah, I'll second that.
I guess
I'll third that. I'll also plug my, I was going to post my name, but actually posting an entire link is like a galaxy brain.
wow, Jesse had UX thoughts. He just knows.
Yeah.
But I mean, aside from that though, like one thing I will say on the Gitcoin side is just like, we have even our own internal like Mattermost chat that's used on the app. Like, if you want to interact with us, feel free to just ping us on that chat. Or ping me on, instead of Twitter, also on any of like the Gitcoin like public channels. I'm usually pretty responsive there. And yeah, all those can be found on the site. The one we don't have actually is like Telegram, which incidentally like is something we should probably consider doing. And then, does anyone have any other suggestions other than Twitter? I feel like all of the crypto community is like centralized on Twitter. We gotta revive Peepa. It's the future. No one agrees on that. That's probably fair. But yeah, thank you all so much. And Ed, any closing thoughts before we dive into other questions?
No, I feel we're in a good position. And for the benefit of everyone, I'm going to be starting the recording right now. I'm going to start.